Hello friends, welcome back to the channel Anthropology Think Tank for UPSC CSE. Today we'll be starting our lecture 2 which deals with the unit 1.3, that is the main branches of anthropology, their scope and their relevance, and also the development of these branches. So we'll be dealing them in the two parts because this video will be around 30 minutes and I don't want to stretch it beyond 30 minutes. So as already seen in the previous lecture that how the branches of anthropology are classified. So we'll start dealing with the physical anthropology from the next slide. So first starting with the definition of anthropology. As we have already seen that anthropology is the holistic study of human evolution and variation in the time and space. What does that mean? This is a holistic study, that is all the elements of the human life are interconnected. That is biology is connected to food gathering practices, to the religion and to everything which is there in the human life. Also it studies human evolution, that is how humans have evolved with time. That is like the fossils Australopithecus evolved into Homo erectus, then Homo habilis, then Neanderthals. So this way it studies the evolution of humans passing through different fossil stages. Then studies the variation in the humans. So what is variation in the humans? As we know, there are genes in human beings. Now these different genes lead to different kind of features, like some genes will result into some kind of blood groups, some kind of colors and hair colors, and these different variations do exist in the human population due to the factors of mutation, genetic recombination, environment, natural selection, and all these features which leads to variation in human beings. And how this variation occurs? This occurs in time as well as in space. So this way you can define anthropology in a very simplistic manner rather than chasing scholars which we cannot remember all the definitions in the exam time. This I'm telling you with the experience of 4 mains I have written and scored over 140 marks in anthropology paper 1 every time. Now moving to the next slide, which deals with the scope of physical anthropology. So the first is paleoanthropology. So what does paleo means? Paleo means old. So paleoanthropology deals with the old fossils of the extinct humans. And on the basis of this, they try to understand the origin and evolution of human beings. Then next is primatology. So primatology deals with the non-human primates. See, human is also a primate. So here we are dealing basically with a non-human primate. And what are the aspects we are studying? The aspects are anatomy, the locomotion, and the behaviors, right? So, like for example, they have non-human primates such as chimpanzees, gorillas, gibbons, and orangutans. And one of our prominent studies, the behavioral study by John Goodall, which was also asked this year in the mains. Then there's the next aspect of human genetics. This area covers the syllabus from unit 9.1 to 9.4. So what is it studies? It studies about the Mendelian inheritance and the associated genetic diseases like the chromosomal aberrations are there. And it combines different kinds of methods, like if you see the syllabus 9.1, you see there are a lot of methods in man family study, like there is a pedigree analysis, then there is twin studies, then there are cytogenetic methods. So different kinds of methods are employed in human genetics to study the human inheritance. And then if you see the unit 9.2, then there is population genetics. So that combines the Mendelian ideas of heredity with the Darwin's natural selection to give synthetic theory of evolution, which is there in the unit 1.4 of the syllabus. So what does this mean? So population genetics basically study the distribution of gene pool and how this gene pool evolves with the time. And because some genes are fitter than the others, so due to Darwin's natural selection, these genes get transferred and leads to evolution in the population. And don't worry, we'll be dealing them in the discuss in detail later. Then next is the human variations and adaptability. So as we know, there are human variations in the population. So from unit 9.5 to unit 9.6, we'll be discussing with these variations, like the racial studies, like the ABO blood groups, HLA, RH blood groups, and different kind of blood groups. And in the unit 9.7, we'll be studying the ecological anthropology. And what does ecological anthropology studies? It studies the biocultural adaptations in response to cold stress, hot stress, and high altitude stress. Like for example, if a person is living in a high altitude, so what are the variations it will need? Because we know that at high altitude there is oxygen deficiency, or rather we should say that there is lack of available oxygen because the blood cannot utilize so much oxygen. So like they have unique features, like they have broad chest, they have more capillary density, and such other features will be taking up in the unit 9.7 in detail. See, this entire lecture is about knowing the basics of anthropology, that what are the components. If you can remember these components well, this will help you to generate subheads in your answers. And remember the keywords, which are the major emphasis of our lecture series. Then we have epidemiological anthropology. So as we know that anthropology is study of biocultural phenomena in time and space. So different cultures have different concepts of health and illness. Like if you see, there are some cultures, like let's say we have Indian culture. So we have our own concepts of, personalistic and emotionalistic. Like we say, he got bad eye, he got nazar lag gayi. And then like we have Ayurveda and other things, shamans are there, local bhopas are there who are used to cure the people. So that shows the epidemiological anthropology scope. And then we have the human growth and development, which is also known as oxology. What does it study? If you see the unit 10, you will find that studies different stages of growth and the patterns of growth. Like there are different stages of growth, from natal stage to adolescence to senescence, and so there are different kind of stages. Then what are the factors that affect the growth? Like there are genetic factors. Like suppose if there is a person who is having Down syndrome, so because of the absence of chromosome they will be stunted, or like how the parents and child resemble. So this shows that there are genetic factors behind this growth. And then we have nutrition, how nutrition affects. If someone is malnutrition, they will not grow, they will suffer in the growth process. Similarly, if the environment is cold, we find people are more short and stocky to conserve the energy, right? So then it also studies secular trends. So this question was asked this year, the secular trends. So secular trends basically refer to what are the patterns that are being seen in the population for the continuous period of some generations. Like now we are seeing people are maturing early, or they are having higher heights compared to the past people, or they are having more weight to the past people. So this particular trend is known as secular trend. Then we also have aging and senescence theories to explain what are the reasons for aging. And finally, we study with the somatotypes. Well, there are basically three important kind of somatotypes, and by studying somatotypes, we can understand how particular human physiques are more useful for certain applications, certain sports, how they are. There are certain somatotypes which are susceptible to diseases. So this way we can understand. And last is human reproductive demography, which is the unit 11. It studies about factors of fecundity, fertility, menarche, and how these factors influence the population structure. This is very important because India is passing through the stage of demographic dividend. So, and also we have a population which is very fast in number, and we want to make it useful and control the population also. So, how these factors can help in controlling population, like by introducing contraception practices, by delaying the marriages and all these things, we can control our population. So, this is broadly the scope of physical anthropology. Now we'll deal with the relevance. So relevance is very clear that first is it studies human evolution. So it helps us to understand origin and interplay of biology and culture. Like suppose when we start having cooked food. So cooked food means that our teeth don't need much strength to bite to chew the food. So our teeth grow smaller with the time, right? Similarly, because our brains are evolving in time, they are becoming bigger. So the pelvis of the woman becomes broader to deliver the baby. So this way we can understand how the evolution takes place in the humans because of culture and biology. Then next is human genetics. So it studies our DNA technology is there, medicines are there, vaccines are there. Then we have the concept of genetic counseling here. So this way it is very relevant to check diseases, to improve the family life and other things. Also, we have the 9.5 unit racial studies. So it helps to study the birth of myth of racism. Like we have seen in the past that how Northeast people were made to leave Bangalore. So this race concept helps us to understand that all human species are single race and there is no one superior or inferior, rather in intelligence or physical features. And finally, we have epidemiological anthropology. So we have new emerging infection diseases like dengue and other things, which can make our entire population able. And moreover, this relevance is very, I think, 4 or 5 points. You can even add more points as per your understanding with as you read the syllabus more. So the next is what are the methods involved in physical anthropology? So there are fieldwork methods. Like there are dating methods which are used by paleoanthropologists. Like there is carbon dating method, potassium argon dating methods to compare the fossil age, and this helps to determine the link between modern humans and biological ancestors. Then next is the comparative method. We have already seen all these methods in the 6 unique methods we have studied for the anthropology. That's who in this comparative method we study racial variations, anatomy variations between ape and humans, between different kind of races. So they help us to understand how they have evolved with time and what are the specific features which need attention over them. Then next is the case study method. Like in the unit 9.1 of the syllabus, we have twin studies and pedigree analysis. So we will be taking up some case studies there, how these case studies were relevant to understand the human genetics. Now we deal with the developments of physical anthropology as seen in the different branches. So like the first branch we studied was paleoanthropology. So Cuvier is called the founding father of paleontology, and Blainville was the one who coined the term paleontology to refer to the study of ancient living organisms through fossils. Then this is the sequence of how these fossils were discovered in time. This is not the evolutionary sequence, but rather the sequence as per their year of discovery, because we are studying here the development of physical anthropology. So this is how they evolved. They were found with their years. And don't worry about seeing this much detail in one go. The basic aim of these slides is to give you a short summary and ready to revise notes material, so that later you can see these slides quickly and go through them, and these will settle in your mind slowly while we discuss unit 1.6. So don't worry about this. So on a very simple way, I will suggest what is like Neanderthal, then Cro-Magnon, then Homo erectus, then Homo heidelbergensis, then Australopithecus, and so on to discover. The first discovery was made in 1856. Then we have the aspect of human evolution, which is dealt with in unit 1.4. So the first theory was of Lamarck, which was first evolutionary theory, and it was a theory of inheritance of acquired characteristics. And this was given in his book Philosophical Zoology. I'm giving you only the short summary so that you develop the idea of what are the things we are going to read in our syllabus. We don't need to wrote anything which I'm telling here. I'm just giving you an outline so that you remember all these topics, so that if a question comes you can broadly write what are the themes which we have studied in our syllabus. Then we study the Charles Darwin origin of species, in which the theory of natural selection was given as the main theory of evolution. And to counter these theories, then August Weismann gave the germplasm theory, where he states that inheritance only takes place with germ cells. He was basically countering Lamarckian idea of inheritance of acquired character. He says that if such a thing happens, then a bodybuilder should be a bodybuilder because he can acquire those muscles. But he says that these are somatic variations that is not transferable to the child, right? Those are only transferable by gametes. Then in 1901, Hugo de Vries gave the mutation theory, where he studied some plant which had underwent certain variations suddenly. So on the basis of these sudden variations, he came to understand that variations can occur due to mutations. And then finally is the synthetic theory of evolution, which combines element of different Darwinian and post-Darwinian ideas like the natural selection, genetic drift, hybridization, mutation. All these elements were combined to finally give a synthetic theory, which is widely accepted now as the theory of evolution. Then we have the developments in primatology and human taxonomy. So this was a person named Edward Tyson who started the primate studies. He differentiated between animals, humans and monkeys by dissecting a chimpanzee. Then came the Carl Linnaeus, and he in his System Naturae classified man as a primate in the human taxonomy. So after that comes Haeckel. He published in 1890 the Encyclopedia of Primate Anatomy, and if you remember that till now there were two fossils that were discovered, Neanderthal in 1856 and Pithecanthropus in 1891. So on this basis of this, he tries to reconstruct a human phylogeny. Phylogeny is what? Phylogeny is a tree, like this is a tree, then these are the branches. So he tries to construct such kind of tree branches where he says that Neanderthal and Pithecanthropus are related to humans through a phylogeny, and this was the first way that how the Darwinian idea of descent with modification was came into existence. Then we have the very prominent primatologist Washburn Sherwood. So he studied non-human primates and said hunting, tool use, and division of labor were the critical events in the human evolution. Why does he say so? He says so because hunting and tool use were one of the reasons that made humans to come to the ground from arboreal, that is trees, and earlier the humans were living in trees. Then this led to bipedalism, which made humans free their hands and make tools. And because of the ability to make tools, human developed a superior culture, and that's how it got separated from apes. Then the other developments were the Napier's study of four types of primate locomotion. We'll be dealing with them in detail in the unit 1.5. This was also asked in the year 2020. So these are the four mechanisms: vertical, clinging, and leaping. Leaping is jumping, clinging is grasping something or holding something. The next is quadrupedalism, that is walking on the four legs. Then we have brachiation, that is using arms to suspend on the branches. And then end is bipedalism, where like us, where people they were walking on the 2 feet. And there is a famous primatologist Jane Goodall, which was asked this year in the 2020 exam. So she studied chimpanzee and found behaviors such as hugs and kisses, which are a symbol of affectionate bonds between the family. But at the same time, she also found there was tendency for aggression among the chimpanzee, where the dominant females were deliberately killing the youngs of other females to maintain their domination. And they even went to the extent of cannibalism. So this is a very important primate behavior. Then she challenged the idea that only humans could use the tools and that chimpanzees were vegetarians. So what she observed was there was a chimpanzee who was having the stalks of grass, and he was putting those grass in the termite holes and removing them from the hole covered with the clinging termites. So like basically it means that this is a hole and this chimpanzee is using this grass to when it is grass, and then the termites will hold this grass and he'll pull out this grass stalk and eat this termite. So this is a kind of fishing of termites. And then the next was cleaning twigs of the trees to make twigs more effective, shows the ability to make tools. Then the next is development and human variation studies. So as we already know that Buffon and Blumenbach introduced the concept of race. Blumenbach is called the father of physical anthropology. He had a huge collection of human skulls and classified them into five races. They had the idea that all races have single origin, and Caucasoid was the most superior race of which Adam and Eve belonged to. And it is the degeneration of Caucasoid race that has led to formation of other races due to poor environment and diet. And on the basis of this, they say that if environment was in control, then all the modern human races can be reverted back to Caucasian races. So this is a very eugenicist, a very ethnocentric kind of idea that shows that the Caucasian is the most superior race. So to counter this racist idea, Boas gave a new idea that race can be changed by the environment. He studied some Japanese kids in the US environment and observed those changes. We'll be discussing with them in the detail in the later part. Then, then came the UNESCO Statement of Race to dispel the scientific foundations of racism. Then the next studies were for the human variations were in the ABO blood group by Landsteiner, RH blood group by Wiener, HLA studies by Snail, and some other variation units which will be taken up in the unit 9.6. Then what are the development in the human genetics? So this is about how that 9.1 development, like classical genetics. Mendel worked on the pea plant and established the theory of Mendelian inheritance. Right? He gave the laws of dominance and recessiveness, the law of independent assortment, and other laws on which the inheritance can be explained. And inheritance only of the monogenic type, not the polygenic type. Then we have the unit 9.3 population genetics, where we come across Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, which says that if the four forces of mutation, natural selection, drift are absent, then there is no change in the frequency of alleles in the gene population and there is no evolution. So for the population geneticist, the microevolution means the change in the frequency of gene pool. Like suppose this is a gene pool, right? This is at time t equal to 0. So it has now A gene, B gene, A gene. So let's say this A gene is gone due to mutation and only B gene remains now. So this is a change in the gene pool of the population, right? So now all the population of the this has B blood group only and there is no A blood group. So one example can be understood is the tropical populations which have this B blood group to protect them from the infectious malaria, dengue and other diseases. So in India we see most people are B positive. Then we have the unit 9.1, another topic is of cytogenetics. What does cytogenetics mean? Cyto means cell. So it studies the structure and the function of cell, especially the chromosomes, and their role in hereditary sex determination. Moreover, this abnormality in chromosomes cause various diseases like Down syndrome, Klinefelter syndrome, which we'll be studying in the unit 9.4. And there are different techniques involved in this, like karyotypic, G-banded chromosome staining techniques, then fish techniques, then comparative genomic hybridization, right? So all this will be covered in the unit 9.1. It's just a very broad idea to, and you can keep viewing the slides again and again to fit the syllabus of anthropology in your mind. If you remember the syllabus completely, guys, I can guarantee you paper when will be a cakewalk for you. It's the easiest paper in the entire UPSC because it's highly logical and interrelated. Then we have biochemical genetics. It studies various cellular and biochemical substances like nucleic acid, DNA, RNA, and the inborn error of metabolism. Like there are different kind of diseases like galactosemia, which is the inability of metabolizing glucose. Right. So there are certain kind of biochemical genetic studies. Then you have genetic counseling, whereby prospective parents are suggested that if their child is found to have some disease or if they both are carriers of certain disease, like say both are carriers of thalassemia minor, then the child can be thalassemia major. So it is steps are taken to prevent them from mating or prophylaxis is taken up. We'll be taking this with the unit 9.4 in detail. Some case studies also I have collected for how genetic counseling is being conducted in India. like some project is there in Kerala and some other places. And even you can say about goons, consanguineous marriages leading to sickle cell anemia. So there can be use of genetic counseling and screening. Then we have applied genetics, where we apply pedigree analysis, RDA technology, PCR, gene therapy, etc. into practice to understand human diseases and to correct the human life issues. Right? So is it clear? So till now we have studied. First is the paleoanthropology, which is the unit 1.5 of the 1.6 of the syllabus. Then we have primatology, which is the unit 1.5 of the syllabus. Then we have studied the evolutionary theories, which is the unit 1.4 of the syllabus. Then we studied human genetics, which is the study 9.1 to 9.4 of the syllabus. And then we studied the variation studies, the development in the variation, which is the unit 9.1 to 9.6. So now comes how this old physical anthropology was shifted to new physical anthropology. So in 1951, Sherwood Washburn coined the term new physical anthropology. So old physical anthropology and new is basically on the timeline. So 1900 and before 1900. Then old physical anthropology had a very limited scope. It's just classification based on variation, like what are the different kind of races they classified. This is Mongoloid, this is Caucasoid and all. This was because there was very limited knowledge of genetics and other branches like cytogenetics, which were not in the place till then. So it was not much scope to study also. Only later these studies come in. So Sherwood also shifted the focus to paleoanthropology, primatology, and these things. And Mendel's heredity principle. All these were possible because of study of cells and mutations and all these things which were earlier not available. So then the example can be race classification, and this new physical anthropology is like chromosomal disorders. Then HGB project, which is mapping the entire human genome project, which is called as. Then there are longitudinal studies for the growth. Then there is sports anthropology, how certain kind of physics are more relevant to the sports, right? So this is how the new physical anthropology evolved. So now we will study social anthropology. So first is the definition, which is again very similar to what is of physical anthropology or in general of anthropology. So what it means, this is a holistic study, that is all the components are interrelated. Then there is evolution, that is there is a change, and there is variation, that is there is diversity. So there is change and variation in the human societies on the basis of time and space. This is the subject matter of social anthropology, right? So don't need to remember the definitions by scholars. It is humanly impossible to remember so many definitions by the end of the syllabus. So just go by the broad understanding. So what is the broad understanding? It is a holistic study. Then it studies the change in time, and then it studies the diversity. And there are different approaches that are being used to study this diversity and change, which we'll be covering in the next slides. So the theories and methods employed by anthropology. So the first is the methodology. It reflects the broader ideology of the scholar. Method, it refers to the way of how that knowledge is being systemized. And third is techniques or the tools of data collection. That is how the data is collected by a particular theory. Right. So let's say this is evolution. So evolutionists follow the methodology of cross-cultural comparison or comparative method. So, for example, Taylor compared religion in different societies. He'll say that there are different kinds of religion like monotheism, polytheism, ancestor worship, and they are found in different kind of societies based on their level of evolution. Like the savages follow the ancestor worship or the animism, then the barbaric societies follow the polytheism, and the civilization follows the monotheism. Like, because he says so, because the European civilization was following monotheism, so this is a highly ethnocentric theory. And he uses a comparative method, that is, he's comparing the religion of different cultures. And since he did not focus on data collection, he was an armchair anthropologist, so he was relying on the secondary sources. Then another evolutionist was Morgan. He used genealogical method using the techniques of questionnaires and interview. So We'll be discussing genealogical method and the Morgan theory in detail in just a while. So the next is the functional theory. So functional theory employs the fieldwork and ethnographic method to get a holistic view using the techniques of participant observation method. Then there is culture personality school, which again uses ethnographic and case study method. And the techniques used are different. The techniques use are life history and psychoanalytical techniques. We'll be covering them later while covering the theories part in detail. But if you can remember the summaries, it will be very easy for you to recollect all the points. Similarly, cultural materialism school of Harris uses the amic ethic methodology using the techniques of participant observation. So what is the scope of social anthropology? So scope is studies primitive or the small societies and helps to generate knowledge for future. For example, some languages like Bo language got extinct recently, so it can help us to preserve such knowledge. Also, similar societies, simple societies have simpler organization, so it's easy to understand them. Then it also studies the emergence and development of culture and civilization. For example, great tradition and little tradition studies and how civilizations emerge was studied by Mickham Marriott. This will be studying in Indian anthropology in detail, but just remember this idea because while answering an exam, you can simply use this 4 points and cover this answer. Then we have it studies different social institutions across time and space. Like for example, it studies marriage, family, studies caste system, studies economic systems like Kula, political systems like leopard skin chief, and religious rituals like shamanism and different kind of other social institutions as well. Moreover, since it studies cultural change also, like for example, in the social institution of marriage, right? So it studies how the marriages change from arranged marriage to love marriages, live-in relationships, etc. So these 4 points are basically the scope of social anthropology. And now we see the relevance of social anthropology. So it promotes social integration as it follows cultural relativist perspective, that is, no culture is superior or inferior. So it helps to prevent the schism between the societies and ethnic movements. Like, for example, Northeast migrants were made to do exodus from Bangalore in the year 2012 on some racial conflicts. Also, it helps to understand the impact of new forces of social change like urbanization, industrialization. Like there was a project by POSCO and Niyamagiri. So the Dongriya Kond were resisting it because it was disturbing their nature man spirit complex. So what is nature man spirit? Nature man spirit is that the religion, the economy and the social institutions of the tribe is interconnected and which was being disturbed due to the displacement from the Niyamagiri hills. So they were resisting this displacement. So now we will study the development of social anthropology, which is basically by and large covering the unit 6. So this will be building the theoretical background here and that will be very helpful in the later studies of anthropology. So the first is the evolutionary school. Now this is a theory of cultural growth and change. So it was given by E.B. Taylor and L.H. Morgan, the founding fathers of social anthropology. So how this theory comes into existence? Now there was an influence of enlightenment in the 19th century. So everyone wanted to establish their discipline as science. So these scholars applied Darwinism to social institutions. That is like organism passes through different stages and evolves into a higher form. Similarly, the social institutions also pass through the stages of savagery, barbarism, and civilization to achieve the highest purpose of civilization. And they gave the 4 concepts of psychic unity of mankind, parallel inventions, unilinear progressive evolution, and cultural parallels and survivals to explain the similarities and variations among the cultures. So psychic unity of mankind means that all the humans in all the places are same, and so they evolve different, they solve their problems through similar parallel innovations. Like if I have to write, I'll develop a pen. Similarly, if someone in USA has to write, he'll also develop a pen because he has the same thought process as me, right? So they say that mankind has psychic unity, and so parallel innovations keep on going. And this is the progressive evolution, that is, it evolves from lower forms to higher forms. And finally, to explain the variations among the cultures, they gave the concept of cultural survivals and parallels. So this is the L.H. Morgan scheme. So what does he say is that how it evolves, that this is the stage, this is the material culture, this is the how family is evolving, this is how kinship terminology is evolving, and this is how socio-political organization is evolving. So you can understand from this table that how it moves from lower savagery to barbarism to civilization, and the economy changes, material culture changes from fruits and nuts and fishing and fire, and ultimately reaches till the characteristics of civilization, which is writing, phonetics, alphabet, etc. Similarly, the family also evolves from consanguine to patriarchal to monogamy. That is, they classify monogamy as the highest form of the marriage and incest as the lowest form of marriage, which is practiced in the lower savagery. Then came the school of historical particularism or the cultural relativism. So Boaz was a Jew, and we see that Jews were facing a lot of racial discrimination in that period. So he wanted to remove this racial hierarchies from anthropology. So he criticized evolutionists for following things like they did no fieldwork and armchair anthropologists. They had ethnocentric approach, and they had a scientific view which they treated all the humans as same without understanding their respective problems. And since they were ethnocentric, they considered only their culture superior and did not respect other cultures. And that is why was introduced the concept of cultural relativism, so that each culture should be understood in its own circumstances. Now, also diffusionist school was existing, which was again critical of evolutionist school. So they say that psychic unity of mankind and independent innovation is a flawed idea. They believe that man is unimaginative. Now, if you see, like, all of us are not scientists. We borrow things which are already there in the place. Not all of us are inventing TVs or pens or anything. So we are borrowing. Let's say computer was invented in US and then it was diffused to all other places. So similarly, humans are unimaginative and had limitless capacity to adopt, but not to invent. So that is why they oppose the evolutionist idea of psychic unity of mankind and independent evolutions. And then there are three schools in this particular diffusionist school. The next is the functionalist school. So functionalist school is again critical of evolutionists. Why they're critical? They believe that there are no cultural survivals. They say that all the traits of the culture have utility, and that is why only they exist in the culture. If the trait would have not having any utility, it would have not survived the culture. Then they also criticize them for doing no field work. The functionalists say that we should focus on synchronic studies. Why they say so? Because anthropologists study pre-literate society. Therefore, oral history may mix up with the myth, and data so collected is not reliable. So functionalists believe that to understand culture scientifically, the contemporary functioning of institutions must be studied, which is synchronic studies, that is contemporary functioning, and that can be studied only by fieldwork, by doing participant observation method, right? So they are against the historical reconstruction of the cultures. So now if you see, the evolutionist is a theory of cultural growth and change. Like they are explaining how the cultures are evolving, how they are growing and changing. On the other hand, functionalism is a theory of cultural integration. That is, it says like human body, all the elements of society are interrelated. For example, nature man spirit complex, as we have discussed in the case of Dongria cones, or we can also see how Kula ring is an interrelated as activity, right? So Kula ring basically is undertaken for exchange of economic goods. But while taking this exchange of economic goods, the Trobrianders will be making boats. And since this is a journey of sea, so they are very uncertain about sea journey. So they'll be performing certain magical rituals. Also, they'll be teaching their children how the boats are made. So it has also educative function, right? This is also having religious function and economic function. So all these are interrelated. Then next is the neo-evolution school. So like we have seen, classical evolutionists and were criticized a lot by diffusionists, cultural relativists, functionalists. Everyone was criticizing them for being ethnocentric and proposing grand theories without giving no fieldwork. So 20th century neo-evolutionists will try to give evidences for this. So the basic differences of data collection. So how the data collection differs is there are basically three schools for that. The first is archaeological evidences. So Gordon Child gives archaeological evidences to show how cultures are different. Then Leslie White explains this on the basis of measure of energy capture. And finally, Stewart gives ethnographic differences on the basis of environment. That is how the cultures of a desert are different, and all the desert cultures are similar everywhere. Similarly, he says how the the cultures living in the high altitude will be similar everywhere, but they will be different from the desert culture. So this way they are now trying to collect evidences which were earlier missing from the classical evolutionary school because they had done no field work. Now comes the culture and personality school. So this is for the first time where anthropology is combined with the psychology. So this is a very unique thing that happens in anthropology here. So because Benedict was a student of Boas, so again she takes cultural relativist perspective. So she says that all the cultures are having certain personality which arises due to their own unique culture, and these personalities fed into people through their enculturation and child rearing practices, right? So we'll be discussing them in detail, but you can give a basic idea here that uh, a culture has a unique personality and which arises because of the specific situations of that culture, and it comes into the people through enculturation of the people. So now moving on to the next school of structuralism. So how structuralism is coming into existence. So Strauss differs from Radcliffe Brown. Radcliffe Brown was focusing on the structure of society, whereas Strauss is focusing on the structure of human thought process. He says that if human thought process can be understood, we can understand how the culture functions. So now for this, he studies several cultural phenomena like myths, ritual, kinship, incest taboo, and moiety and other things. So on this study basis, he found that human thought process exists in the form of binary opposition, and it is same in all the cultures. And he takes a linguistic view to study cultural phenomena, where he says that all the cultural phenomena can be broken down into smaller units, and they acquire meaning only when arranged according to certain relationships. Then we have cultural materialism. Then it is a theory which came to criticize cultural relativists for their emic perspective, and also it criticizes idealists like Strauss, which remove the culture from the materialist base and placed it in the mind of the people, which cannot be studied actually. So Harris actually is of the belief that we can never understand what the people are saying, and on the basis of the understanding of the emic, that is a native, we can never understand why a culture practice comes into existence. So he's against the emic view and he takes the etic view. For example, he gives the example of sacred cow, where he says that if we ask the locals, they will explain that cow is sacred just because of some religious beliefs. But when he studied it deeply, he found that cow has a dual utility of giving milk products as well as the birth toxins which are useful to plow fields, so they are not slaughtered. Then came the symbolic and interpretative anthropology. So they are against the proposal of universal theories. They rather believe that all the cultural practices and all the cultures are having some shared symbols, and they these beliefs may be very unintelligible, but when seen from the uh, part of cultural system, they acquire meaning. So, like he says, if a person is having and a person is blinking or he's twitching, can only be understood by asking that person, right? So this is the same way he's trying to understand. So he studies the cockfight and he asks people what does it means to them, and then on the basis of that he collects a lot of data, and then he gave a final interpretation, which is also known as the concept of thick description. Similarly, there is another school of British school which is known as Turner School, the ritual symbolism, which is based on the concept of social drama, which means the public episodes of tensional eruption. And every social drama has four stages, that is the stage of breach, the crisis, redressal, reintegration, or scission. This he explains with the concept of liminality or communitas. We'll be taking this theory in detail. I'm not intending to make it, already the lecture is going very long, so I'm covering it in a very crisp manner just to give you a brief idea. For writing a small answer if a question comes on the development of social anthropology. Finally comes the cognitive anthropology, where De Andrade gives a definition that it is a study of relationship between human society and human thought process. And they were inspired by Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, Levi-Strauss, and cultural relativism. So they believe that culture is a shared mental model which is composed of logical rules which are embedded in the language and not in the material objects. So they, for example, there's a study of Conklin who studied Hanunu cultural categories and says how uh, for one culture a thing may mean different. Like for example, if I live in a coastal culture, then for me a lot of fishes varieties there, like say a tuna is there, salmon is there, and many fishes are there, and I will be knowing all the names. But for a person who is living in a desert area or who is a vegetarian, for him a fish is a fish. He cannot understand all the different kind of fishes. So a cultural anthropologist generates such taxonomies to understand how a culture functions. And finally is the postmodernism. Postmodernism rejects and study of anthropology science. They said there are no truths in science in this world, and they are basically means to dominate other people, and they tell more about the researcher themselves rather than the society they are studying about. So they are critical of objective truths and grand theories. So this is how it evolves. And finally is Indian social anthropology. These are some Indian social anthropologists which we'll be discussing in detail in the paper too. And this is how I like to complete this lecture now on development of social anthropology and physical anthropology. So we have covered two branches, physical anthropology and social anthropology. The linguistic anthropology and archaeological anthropology will be covered in the next lecture. Thank you.